Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
I thank the chairman. This amendment simply prohibits the obligation of funds for promotion of or preference for sustainable building materials, including low-embodied concrete or asphalt or net zero emissions in military construction. Let me be clear. This does not prohibit the use of those materials. You can still use them. It just ensures a fair playing field for all types of construction materials, including ones that we have a long history of knowing about and knowing what their integrity is, without the government's thumb on the scale. We don't need the government's thumb on the scale. We know what works, and we don't need to be experimenting with things that might be unsafe. The Biden administration is already demanding so-called green concrete and asphalt standards across the whole of government. They have committed to a government-wide effort to quote-unquote buy clean, including through construction materials. Now, I don't know, but buy clean, like I don't know what you think's dirty about concrete. Comes out of the ground, there's aggregate in it, Portland cement. I don't know what's unclean about stick-built construction made of wood grown all across the country. Hopefully it's grown across this country and not coming from China. Regardless, despite GSA issuing the first nationwide green concrete and asphalt standards according to their 2022 sustainability plan, environmentally preferable paving hasn't saved any money at the initial 6 job sites. Furthermore, it's unclear whether the technical changes in concrete mixtures, in other words, replacing Portland cement with things like fly ash and even hemp, are durable enough for any and all scenarios. Even the loudest voices advocating these technologies worldwide acknowledge the inability for the free market to adopt these technologies on its own. I'm going to quote the World Economic Forum because we love them so much. They're for America. In their 2023 report, that said it's a chicken and egg situation. If firms and their clients, as well as policymakers, don't prioritize, put their thumb on the scale for the use of low-carbon concrete in buildings and infrastructure projects, many manufacturers will be loath to allocate capital expenditures for materials production. And until low-carbon cement and concrete products are produced at greater scale, their availability and cost will be a concern for the industry. So you know what the answer is? The federal government's just going to demand it. That's the answer. Again, if green construction materials somehow become more cost-effective than traditional building materials, they will be used in private and public projects alike. In public and private project alike. Now, I'm just going to give you a scenario in my own hometown where they use fly ash underneath the asphalt at new construction, new government construction. And after about 6 months, when the asphalt on top of it all cracked because it was expanding and contracting due to heat and moisture, they tore it all back out and put the old stuff in that works. I'm not saying that we shouldn't endeavor to find new things that are better. But what I am saying is that the market will figure these things out without the federal government forcing us to accept things that we don't know about, cost more, and we're unsure about the long-term viability. With that, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman for what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Seek opposition to oppose the amendment and to claim 5 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. A most interesting argument presented by our colleague. I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Rogers of Georgia.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank my friend from California. I support the gentleman's intentions, but I have concerns with the impacts if this amendment were enacted as written. Lumber is a sustainable building product. Innovative timber products are currently being used in military construction projects throughout the country. I don't think anyone wants to limit the use of these timber products. The American Wood Council and the Southeastern Lumber Manufacturers Association are opposed to this amendment. I urge my colleagues to oppose it, and I yield back.
The gentleman from California reserves.
I reserved.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this amendment doesn't prohibit the use of any of this material. Not what the chairman said, not what my friend from California is going to state. It doesn't prohibit any of that. All we're saying is that the federal government shouldn't put its thumb on the scale and demand and require that we use these products. The market will work it out. The engineers will work it out. The sustainability over time of using these products will ensure the cost effectiveness and the integrity of the construction. But we can't wait. We're going to force this on everybody, whether they want it or not. And then when it fails, they're going to come back to this place and say, well, we need more money to fix these things we screwed up 10 years ago by using this stuff that wasn't ready for prime time. Just going to remind you when the time comes, because I'm going to be voting against all that funding without a reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I yield a minute and a half to the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee.
Gentleman is recognized
Smith
for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. The point of all this is whether or not sustainability should be an objective that we work towards in our building materials. What this amendment does is it undermines the ability to get to that goal of sustainability. Now, sustainability can mean a lot of different things. Mr. Rogers focused on the aspect of how timber can be used. There is an aspect of sustainability that focuses on whether or not what you're building will enable us to sustain the planet. And it is sort of widely accepted that the way we are using, carbon emitting, all kinds of different issues is jeopardizing the health of the planet long term. And that is something that we ought to think about and we ought to be concerned about. This kind of puts, if this amendment passes, you're putting your thumb on the scale in a different way, saying that sustainability isn't important, you're going to focus on other issues. And actually, Mr. Garamini is very good on this issue because, as the chairman of the Readiness Committee always points out, don't look at the upfront cost, look at the sustainability costs. What does it cost to maintain what you're doing? What is the long-term cost going to be? The market may be very good at figuring out what's going to be cheapest right now, today, in this second, but then we pay over the long term. This amendment basically guts our ability to contemplate that long term, to contemplate what sustainability would look like and what those long-term costs are. So I will join. It's good to be on the same side as the chairman on an amendment. So I'm with him. We should reject this amendment. Please vote no.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania has 30 seconds left, and he is recognized.
I'm going to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from California is
May
recognized.
I inquire as to the amount of time I have?
The gentleman has 3 minutes remaining.
3 minutes.
You don't have to use all of it.
Oh. Well, I will take about 2 minutes of that, and then I'll take the last minute after my colleague continues his argument. I'm curious here about the history of the United States government putting its finger on the scale. Let's think for a moment about the way in which the railroad industry was created in the United States. We're talking not only a finger, a thumb, but an extraordinary weight of the federal government creating it. Let's talk about nuclear energy. Let's talk about aircraft. Let's talk about the airline industry. We talk about anything in modern America today, and in one way or another, the federal government led and caused, in part, together with the private sector, for the industry to develop. What we are doing here in the NDAA is to set out a mechanism using the military to bring into the economy new technologies that are sustainable, that reduce greenhouse gases. If you want to buy if you want to buy steel from several American steel companies, this amendment would make it impossible for the military to buy that steel because they are using sustainable methods of creating the steel. So throughout the entire system, we find the military moving towards sustainability, reducing cost, and I might add here, maintaining the standard that is necessary for that particular, let's say, a structure, a steel structure. Could be sustainable, using hydrogen rather than coal to create the steel. Or it could be wood, cross-laminated wood products, which previously were not used by the military because they weren't considered. What we have done is to say, consider using these sustainable materials. Now, with that, I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Now, I know my good friend is from California, so I got to restate things over and over again, but this prohibits the obligation or the preference for sustainable building materials. It does not prohibit the use of these materials, so they can be used. It just doesn't say that the government's going to put its thumb on the scale. And oh, by the way, all we're doing in this NDAA without this amendment, is saying the taxpayers, you're going to bear the burden. You folks up there are going to bear the burden of seeing if this stuff works, how long it works, how expensive it is. The railroads, yeah, absolutely, because there wasn't a railroad. Nuclear energy didn't exist without the government. That's a little different than things that already do exist and already work. With that, I urge adoption. I yield the balance.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from California is recognized.
It's always interesting to listen to my colleague and often find that he is incorrect, Mr. Chairman. However, let's consider for a moment what we really have here. We have an entirely new system being developed within the United States and really around the world, and that is new materials that are being developed every day. What this amendment does would make it difficult, if not impossible, for the military to engage in the purchase of those new materials. It is, in fact, the military that has, through the history of the United States, brought into the American economy new systems and new materials. And we can go through a long, long list of those, but I won't spend all my time to do that. What I will simply say is what we are doing with the NDAA is to make sure that we have resiliency, that we are reducing the impact of carbon in our society and in the climate of this world, and we are also requiring that those new materials meet the highest standards used in all of the United States. So I'm afraid I'm out of time.
Expired.
We'll continue this in the back room. I yield back.
The gentleman yields.